Hello, everyone. Um, I'm Salad Blue Sister, and welcome to my show, My Turn to Talk. Today, I'd like to talk about something that, once again, is disturbing, at least disturbing to me. African Americans have received zero compensation for the fact that we were slaves. Now, there may be some people who feel that you don't deserve it, you shouldn't get it. You know, your ancestors were slaves, you weren't. So why should you get reparations? Okay. But on April 16th, 1862, President Lincoln signed the District of Columbia Compensated Emancipation Act. This law prohibited slavery in the District of Columbia, forcing 900 slave owners or more or less to free their slaves, with the federal government paying the owners an average of $300 per slave. So that's about, in today's terms, $8,000 per slave. So we're going to prohibit the District of Columbia from having slaves. And this was in 1862. Okay, slaves were freed in 1865. So we're going to prohibit you from having slaves, but we're going to compensate you because you're losing. You are losing your workers. You're losing your main bread and butter. So we're going to compensate you. So you can compensate a slave owner, but you can't compensate the people who were tortured and forced to be your labor. For at least 250 years, actually longer. Because it wasn't 1619, it was before then. So you can't compensate the people who did your labor. When slaves were freed, they were promised 40 acres and a mule. Now, with all the slaves that were in America at that time, and there were millions, that would have been a lot of land, a lot of mules, but it would have been a lot of land. And one thing white folks treasure that's high up on their list is land. They were not about to give a bunch of Black folks, a bunch of slaves, land. They were too busy taking land away from the Native Americans. You think they're going to give us 40 acres? How would Black lives have changed if we had those 40 acres. 40 acres, which really wasn't much for one person, but collectively, it was huge. But you're going to give compensation to slave owners? How is that right? How is that possible? So again, I talk about the American hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of America. How do you compensate someone for degrading and humiliating and lynching and beating and raping and owning another human being? How is that possible? How, I mean, tell me, how is this possible? This is the United States of America. Anything is possible. And when they say that, when they say anything is possible in America, believe them, because it is. Anything is possible when it benefits one particular race of people. And you know I'm right. So again, on April 16, 1862, the District of Columbia Compensated Emancipation Act became law. And here you have a picture of people celebrating the abolition of slavery in Washington, D.C., April 19th, 1866. But in 1862, slave owners in D.C. were compensated. Because they had to free their slaves. Now, America has a history of doing things that are low down, dirty, cruel, disgusting. We have a history of it. We've had a history of doing low down stuff ever since America became America. But before then, when Native Americans had it, yes, they fought amongst themselves, you know, other tribes fighting other tribes. Yes, there were problems. But the amount of greed wasn't there. When the Spaniards came over and the Europeans and Columbus, who supposedly discovered America, came over, that's when all the trouble started. That's when all the disease started. Native Americans weren't exposed to smallpox and syphilis and tuberculosis and all these other nasty germs and diseases that Spaniards and Europeans brought over. I mean, the Aztecs and the Mayans, were wiped out. A lot of it had to do to disease. But this raping and pillaging of the land in America, that wasn't there until Europeans came over and got greedy. So do you think that slaves are really going to get 40 acres and a mule? But they give reparations to a slave owner? Again, how is this possible? America has a history of systemic racism in this country. We do. And we still have it. It's still ongoing today. So let's think about it for a moment, okay? Let's just think about this for a moment. How much compensation would have been offered to people who suffered torture and other human rights abuse and whose labor and families were stolen for generations? Consider this. How much compensation did those people get? Zero. Nada. Nothing. Nothing. I mean, just consider that. Yet some slave owners got $300 per person. You know what that $300 would have done for that slave, for that ex-slave? $300 during that time, again, equivalent to $8,000 to today, considered a stimulus. African Americans are needed in this country. We've proven that. But you also need our vote. I was talking to a friend earlier today, and we were talking about President Biden. We were talking about President Biden and President Obama. We were talking about Vladimir Putin. John McCain. Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan. And we were talking about them because of a tweet that someone posted talking about Juneteenth. And the tweet was like most of this person's tweet, you always have to try to figure out exactly what are they saying. But when you look back at history and what presidents have done for African Americans, Haven't done much. Now, yes, Lincoln freed the slaves. But then he turns around before that, before he freed them, 3 years earlier, he gives slave owners compensation because they had to free them. What president has really done something for African Americans? I mean, you had President Johnson who signed the Voting Rights Act, which was good. But we don't have any anti-Black hate crimes. We don't have bills for that. We don't have bills for, you know, hate crimes against Black people. And we've been suffering abuses ever since we first were brought over here. You had the federal government compensate slave owners for loss of property. We were property for loss of property. But the people who were freed were not compensated. They weren't given a stimulus to help them transition to freedom. We weren't given our promised 40 acres and a mule. We weren't given that. But a slave owner is compensated for loss of property. This is America. Anything in America is possible. That's been proven time and time and time again. Anything in America is possible. I look at President Obama. He had an opportunity to write some executive orders and what have you. He didn't do it. And now I look at President Biden, who won mainly because of the Black vote, especially women. And I understand the infrastructure bill is important. It is. It's extremely important for that to pass. But when you're in the desert without water and you need help, and someone helps you and gives you water, then the next time you see them, you thank them. We gave President Biden water. I haven't seen any thanks. I mean, he pushed through that Asian hate bill real fast. That went through really fast, which is good. But you need to push more on the For the People Act. Don't just give speeches about John Lewis. Do something to honor him. Push for these voting rights to be protected. Be more vocal. Let us know you care. because there's going to be another election. And I'm not just talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about all of the people who rely on the Black vote. Because together, collectively, when we vote, we are powerful. What about reparations for the descendants of slaves? Japanese Americans got compensation, got reparations for the internment camps during World War II. Why is it so hard now? There are some people who oppose reparations and say, why should the generations now be blamed for what previous generations did? That's fair. That's a fair argument. But I think you're missing the point. They're not being blamed. Why should the generations of people who, are descendants of slaves not be given what they were promised? I see shopping malls going up constantly. I see forests being raised to, put up a new condominium. I mean, where I live, coyotes are a problem getting into your backyards, eating eating and attacking and eating, your pets, because we're building so many homes that we're taking away their habitats. We're taking away where they live, so they have nowhere else to go. So they're scavenging for food. So we can build all these buildings and put your name on it. Call it whatever tower, whatever hotel, whatever golf course. But we couldn't get our 40 acres. Really? America has a problem. America has many problems. And once again, I bring up critical race theory. The fact that a president signed a law, signed an act that became law to compensate previous slave owners for the loss of property should be taught in schools. And that loss of property were slaves. That needs to be taught in school. We're talking 900 plus slave owners just in the District of Columbia. So let's say each slave owner owned at least 50 slaves, even 25 at 900 slave owners. You know how much money each slave owner would have received? And again, in today's money, in today's terms, that's $8,000. You know how much money that was for this slave owner? That's a lot of money. for a loss of property. And we're talking about people, a loss of property. I have a problem with that. I have a huge problem with that, and it makes me angry. You know, um, people who oppose reparations and want to say, our descendants shouldn't have to deal with what it wasn't our fault. We didn't own slaves, you know. But what benefit are you reaping right now because your family did? Let's look at slave owners from the South and peoples whose families were slave owners, especially if they were wealthy ones. How much of that wealth from your family having owned slaves carried over today that you're enjoying the generational wealth, the wealth that has been passed down for generations? What have you benefited from? How did you benefit? And you know what I'm talking about. So if your great great grandfather owned slaves, and they had a plantation that was just prosperous, how have future generations benefited from that prosperity? I mean, tell me. I bet you have. I mean, Mitch McConnell, his family owned slaves. How has he benefited from his family being slave owners? I mean, Mitch McConnell is a multimillionaire. Did some of that come from generational wealth? I don't know. Did it? Look at Haiti. Haiti has Haiti independence debt for Haitian, back then, Haitian revolutionaries that was paid to slave owners in France when slaves were freed. Haitians had to pay France because France had Haitian slaves, but Haiti had to pay France because France freed slaves. How does that work? So you're enslaving me. I'm the slave, and I have to pay you for my freedom? Come on. I mean, Harriet Tubman tried to pay for her freedom once. Master wasn't having it. Not can't get rid of Harriet. She's too valuable a slave. I'll just take her money. She's not going anywhere. Thank goodness Harriet Tubman was able to flip the switch and she was able to run away and secure her own freedom. But I'm just amazed that we have a law on the books that paid slave owners for a loss of property, slaves. And this is why it's so important. It's so important for the history of America to be told. Because as I said, there's a lot of American history that people don't know about. Or if they know about it, they don't want to talk about it. And a lot of the history of America that people don't want to talk about is dark or it's unfair. I read something the other day and I had to write it down. It said, I may not know white people personally, but I know them historically. I may not know white people personally, but I know them historically. And when I read that, I had to pause. And I was like, damn. I know exactly what this person is talking about. When it comes to dealing with certain groups of people, there are no surprises. There are no surprises. Because for the most part, you kind of know what they're going to do. The conversation I had earlier today was a friend. When we were talking about Vladimir Putin and President Biden. I made the comment that I agreed with Vladimir Putin when he says, look at yourselves before you try to talk to me about democracy. And this friend replied with, well, Vladimir Putin did say that he was against Black Lives Matter. He didn't support them. And she had a problem with that. I didn't have a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it because it came from Putin. And what I mean is, I don't have a problem with it because we know the way Putin thinks. We know that Putin does not respect people who protest for human rights and for fairness and equality. That's expected from him. That's expected from a country that suppresses its people. You know, that's what they do. They don't, you know, there's no hidden agenda. You know, they're not trying to hide the fact that they put their political opponents in jail. Some of them die mysteriously. They arrest protesters. They round them up, they arrest them, and they put them in jail, not where they get out in 24 hours. I mean, they're in jail, they're in prison. This is what this country does. This is what Russia does. So by him saying that he doesn't support Black Lives Matter, oh, okay. I mean, okay, you know, I know you don't. And my friend, she disagreed with me. And I said, no, but I'm looking at it like this. We know he doesn't support Black Lives Matter. But then you come over here to this country and we're preaching democracy to other people. And we have people who should support Black Lives Matter and they don't. We have people who should support voting rights and human rights. I mean, we had the former guy come and clear out, Lafayette Park last summer for a photo op so he could hold a Bible upside down. And the police were vicious, spraying people with pepper spray, hitting them, beating them, whatever. And they're just peaceful protests. So yeah, come look at us. Come look at yourselves. Absolutely. How are we going to tell someone about democracy and freedom when this is what we're doing over here? Tell me how we do that. So on that one thing that Vladimir Putin said, when he said, look at yourselves, absolutely. America is an imperfect country. It is full of hypocrisy. It has always been a hypocritical country. We have always, done things where other people's human rights were violated. And a lot of times viciously. You have to look at the Native American Indians. Let's just start there. The viciousness and the cruelty that was done to them. There were no human rights there. Get rid of the Native Americans because we want that land. Get rid of the savages. They don't deserve to be here. Just kill them. Give them blankets filled with smallpox and they'll just die off. Let's go raid their villages. Make sure you kill, the women and children, so they can't reproduce. But the women, you might want to rape them first. Let's talk about those human rights. Let's talk about the human rights of Africans that were brought to this country. African Americans that were brought to that were born here in slavery and were beaten and raped and tortured. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about those human rights. Let's talk about the human rights of Chinese Americans, when they were here building the railroad. Let's talk about them. So yeah, let's look at yourselves. Let's look at who we are. Who we are as a nation. But we're also a government that will pay a slave owner for a loss of property. So you tell me what is wrong with this picture. Why is the US government paying a slave owner, but you're not giving anything to the slave who was the one that was hurt, who was the one that suffered, who was the one that deserved the reparations? I mean, Britain, when slavery was abolished in Britain, Britain did the same thing. They gave their slave owners reparations. They paid them for their loss of property. In today's terms, about $20 million. And you look at the systemic racism in Britain, how it's probably more prevalent there than it is here. But then again, I don't know, because America has just gone buck wild since the former guy opened up his mouth as he descended that escalator in 2015. You know, but Britain has this caste system. They're very much into, you're in this class, you're in this class. Royals are here, you know, and they have this system. And Black folks, y'all at the bottom. You're at the bottom. But they paid their slave owners for their loss of property. As slavery was abolished across the globe in countries that had slaves, slave owners were the ones that prospered because of that freedom. And the slaves received zero. They received zero. They received nothing. Nothing. So when people say, again, anything in this country is possible, it is, if you're white. But everyone else, you have to work for it. You have to work really, really hard for it. And some people achieve that American dream, depending upon what you consider the American dream to be. I mean, what does that even mean? The American dream, for who? When they were talking about the American dream, they weren't talking about us. They weren't. But I do believe anything is possible in this country when it comes to a certain group of people. But I will say this, I've gotten to the point where nothing surprises me anymore. Nothing surprises me. I mean, you know, you wake up in the morning and something else is on the news. You're like, oh, okay. I mean, how many mass killings have we had in this country just since January? And we're only at June, 6 months. You know, you wake up, you know, or something pops up on your phone from your news feed, whatever news you're listening to, you know, this mass shooting. I mean, it's like you get numb to it. You get numb to it because it happens so much. We can't even pass a gun law in this country because you got your wackadoos who think that, you know, you're going to take away our guns. You're going to take away our guns. No, we don't want to keep guns out of the hands of people who go out and shoot up people and kill other people. We want to keep them out of those hands. You want to own a gun? Fine, own one. Okay, I don't care. But if you're crazy and you're planning to go shoot up Walmart, or you're going to go, to a 30th floor or whatever of a hotel and start shooting down on people who are there for a festival, I have a problem with that. No, you don't deserve a gun. If your kid's going to go to school and kill his classmates, no, maybe you shouldn't have a gun in the house because you have a crazy kid. Those are the people who don't need guns. We can't even pass gun laws, but we can. And we have given reparations to slave owners. Amazing. Amazing. This is what we went through. This is what we went through right here. This is what we went through. We were put on the slave block. And this is America. It's United States hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy that we live through every single day, every single day. There's a problem. There is a problem. So if you think that we, the descendants of slaves, do not deserve reparations, I ask you to think about that. Because those same descendants went through so much heartache and torture after we were freed. Our communities were burned down. We've been lynched because a person told a lie, usually a white woman saying, he raped me. We've been beaten. We've been drowned. We've been shot. Our babies thrown in the water as alligator bait. We've been stereotyped. We've been called every racial slur you could think of. But we don't deserve reparations. But you can protect the violent terrorists, murderers who stormed the United States Capitol, the Capitol that my descendants built, that the descendants of our ancestors, that slaves built. You look at the plantations across the South that were built by slaves. And we don't get anything for that? Come on. You don't think we have a valid and justifiable reason for deserving reparations. But slave owners get money for loss of property. And some slave owners didn't even tell their slaves they were free. Some slaves didn't find out till 2 years later. Amazing, amazing. So on that note, I'm going to end. I am Solid Blue Sister, and I say always speak your truth. Let your voice be heard, because I will always make sure my voice is heard. And my voice will be heard all the way up to the next election to make sure, and speaking up and calling, and for these voter suppression bills to be repealed. We have too much at stake in this country. And I'm talking right now, I'm talking to African Americans. I'm talking to the Native Americans. I'm talking to the people of color. But we have too much at stake. We have too much to lose to allow what is happening in this country to continue. And it must stop. So I encourage everyone to vote. If you have to stand in line for 24 hours, please do. They're going to be out there watching us. We need to be out there watching them. Poll watchers. So again, I'm Solid Blue Sister. Speak your truth, and I'll see you next time. Bye.